Welcome, everyone, to the MMA Happy Hour podcast. I am Kyle Anthony, your host for today. We are talking UFC 315, headlined by Belal Muhammad and Della Maddalena. We're going to be breaking down 4 plays here on the show today. Now, if you want to become a client, link down in the description. Already have up 4 plays right now locked in. This may be the most units that I have bet on one card this year, probably over the last maybe 7-8 months. Really like this card from a betting perspective. Last week, a terrible night. Not happy about it overall. Had some bad reads, weird performances, and Miesha Tate, I'm embarrassed I haven't bet on her. And the other one, we had, and Bo Nickel's dead to me. So besides for that, we're going to have a big bounce back week this week. Really looking forward to it. Great card overall. 2 title fights. And let's dive into the main event of the evening between Belal Muhammad and Della Maddalena. Now, we currently have this line sitting around minus 192 for Belal. On the comeback here in JDM, we've got plus 160. Now, we know what we're getting here in this fight, right? We already know, what's going on here and how this fight's really going to play out, what the big question is. And the big question where anybody who's got a camera, a microphone, a podcast are all going to be talking about and saying, can Belal Muhammad take down JDM, keep him down, implement his game plan, and just rinse and repeat? And that's going to be a big situation here that we are looking at. And hopefully we can answer that here on the breakdown. Now, the first thing here we got to look at is this is your classic grappler versus striker matchup pretty much overall. We know what, Belal is going to be looking to do, selling out for those takedowns, selling out for positional, looking for control. And pretty much that's going to be his game plan. We know what we're getting out of him. Now, my biggest issue here for Belal is going to be the fact that I just don't think he's that dangerous. Now, I know, saying a current UFC champion is not that dangerous coming from, me, Belal will kick my ass, right? I might be able to land a couple shots, but he just isn't that dangerous. And when you're talking about this type of price at nearly, over 2 to 1, 2 to 1, you got minus 220s out there, and not having the upside of a finish, I think is really, starts to kind of make this fight a lot more interesting when you're looking at it, because where is his finishing ability? What can he do besides looking for those takedowns, looking to bank rounds, and looking for that control time? And if he doesn't have that, it starts to make things, really not look, that good for Belal, because his striking side of things that I know that he's, talking about, hey, I'm going to, stand and strike with Jack. I'm going to strike with him. That I don't think is even, that's a probability of about 0% that he does do that. But with that being said, his striking overall, I don't think is that good. And, I don't know. I'm sure that's not a hot take here, but, his striking for the most part, he'll come forward. He's looking for cutting the distance, getting his hands on you, control time and those kinds of things. And the things that he really does well, I think, is really weaponizing his cardio and weaponizing his pace. I think those are the 2 things that you can see that he can look to do here. Now, that's going to be a big question here for Jack, because we don't know a little bit about that. Now, the first part about it is that this is, a 5-round fight for him. This is his first championship fight. There are those things that I think can be a little bit of a question mark here for JDM coming into this fight. But when you look at it really, for the most part, and when I was going back and watching tape, I do think that Jack can nullify some of the things that Belal does for the most part. And the cardio, I do think that he does have good cardio. We've seen him in fights where he's had to come back. He's had to battle through some tough things, and we're going to talk about both those fights in a minute. But, had to come back, battle through, and, he was able to do those things and able to show that he wasn't tiring out. It wasn't a tiring out type of thing. It was more just battling through. And, 2 of the big things, I think a little bit of the overreaction here is his 2 fights where he had to fight against Basel Hafez and Gilbert Burns. And yes, sure, he was taken down. But both of those, if you go back, really were suspect in both situations here. And the first one with the Basel Hafez is that I feel like a lot of people forget about all the crazy movement that was going on in the weeks leading up to Jack fighting Hafez, where he had multiple canceled fights, multiple opponents, multiple weight cuts within like a couple weeks. And Jack, being the beast that he is, he was willing to just, hey, I'll take on whoever. So we're talking about style changes. We're talking about weight cuts. We're talking about, different events that you may be fighting on. Like there was just a lot of movement going on. Now, with that being said, he went out there and Jack still was able to have, I think, a decent account of himself. Now, Hafez was 3 for 20 on takedowns. As much as people want to say, hey, Jack was taken down, Jack was controlled. Yeah, sure. I think the first round, Hafez, I think kind of surprised Jack, but overall Jack was able to land more shots. It was very, very tight of a fight. I got to say that. But again, with all these weight cuts and all these things weakening him, there's a vulnerability there for him. I think that Hafez, who, clearly on the juice at that point, was able to find some success, but Jack was able to get the victory. The other one was against Gilbert Burns, where Gilbert Burns versus Jack Della Maddalena. Della Maddalena was a 5% max bet play for me in this spot. And I thought right out the gate something was wrong. I'm watching the fight and I'm saying, what the heck is going on with Maddalena? He doesn't look as good as he used to. Something just is off. Now we all come to find out that in that first round, he broke his arm. It did, and still, even with that, he still was able to battle through, even in the third round where, Gilbert Burns was getting takedown. Jack was not getting up. He still was able to reverse, get out, throw the knee, get the finish. And I think that just says a lot about the guy and the fighter that Maddalena is. And now you also got to look on the other side here, where the fact that, right now, I would say that Jack is fighting Belal at the right time. Their 8-year age gap, where I think it's, 8 to 9 year age gap is roughly like, if you blindly take the younger guy on that age gap, it's like almost 70% chance of that fighter, of the younger fighter winning. So you already have that on your side as well. But I do think that we're seeing Jack continue to have improvements, continue to look better, continue to just elevate himself overall. I do think that, he mixes up his targets very well. He's probably the best body work that, in the division by far, mixes it up, opens up opportunities to continue to strike. He's got, actually, I think his get-up game continues to get better. He does not stop moving. His get-up game is pretty solid overall. And I think all the finishing equity is also on his side as well. So I think in this spot here, I do like Jack Della Maddalena. I think he becomes champion here. I think this is a bad matchup right now for Belal, and I think that Jack can get the job done. So I'm taking Jack Della Maddalena and New at plus 160. Next one here we're going to talk about is going to be the other title fight of the evening. Manon Fiorot minus 140, and the comeback here, Valentina Shevchenko plus 120. Now, there is no doubt that Valentina is a legend. Right. We all know that she's a legend of the flyweight division, and which is one of the crazier things is that she has had 13 title fights in the UFC. That is just astronomical for her. She has, she's one of the GOATs. She has done an absolutely fantastic job picking up victories, fighting top level females. And with that being said, I do think we are seeing a decline here. And I don't think as much as it is the last fight that we kind of saw a little bit of a decline, or the fight a little bit prior against Grasso. I think it was a couple of years ago against Talia Santos. And I think that's where you really started to see maybe she's starting to be on the downturn, not as dominant as she was, not as, we're just not seeing what she would used to do here, where Santos was able to get multiple takedowns, threatened multiple submissions, had 9 minutes of control time, strikes were fairly close, and it was a split decision. I think, there were a lot of people that thought Santos won. People thought that Shevchenko won, but either way, it was a very, very close fight. And after that, she had the trilogy with Grasso. And even in that, you just, to my opinion, going back and watch, you could clearly see that she is just not as fast as she used to be with everything, with all of her striking. And I think that's really why she has pretty much transitioned herself to really pushing for wrestling and really leaning on that wrestling. And that really gave her these victories against Grasso, because I do think that Grasso, she is not the highest level striker, but she's tough. She's durable. She's going to keep pushing forward. You almost got to kill this woman in order for her to put her down. She just will continue to move forward. You even saw it when she beat Grasso, where Shevchenko was on her way to victory, and Grasso just doesn't give up. Even in their last one, it was, again, there was that last round, Grasso was still just scraping and clawing her way to look for any type of finish. And that's really where she finds some success there. But if you look at Shevchenko, she didn't want to keep it on the feet with her. She ended up getting, out of the 3 fights with Grasso, 16 takedowns. That is very high for Shevchenko overall, who is now like transitioning into a wrestler overall. She needed the control time. She needed to bank some rounds. And that's really, how she was able to find a lot of success there. And then you look at Manon Fiorot, who is massive for the division, and she possesses top-notch takedown defense. And, 93% takedown defense rate so far in the UFC. And I do think she can keep this fight standing. Now, I was actually at the fight in Atlantic City. The main event which wasn't the greatest main event, but now I guess maybe it's a little bit better, but was Manon Fiorot versus Erin Blanchfield. And, I was front row for that fight. And it wasn't just the fact that, the big storyline is, why didn't Erin shoot for takedowns? Why did she only shoot 3? She was 0 for 3 on takedowns. The biggest reason is because Erin realized there isn't a chance that she is going to be able to take down Manon Fiorot. She realized that she is outgunned, outmuscled, outstrengthened. Like, she just didn't have it. And then she realized, I just got to run forward and just throw combinations. And we know that Erin Blanchfield is not the highest level striker overall. She's tough. She's gritty. We know what they're getting out of her. But that really is why that happened there, where she just gave up on it because, it wasn't a strategy problem. It was the fact she knew, I'm going to waste a ton of energy diving at her legs and I'm not going to get it. And she's going to counter me. And that's just not going to happen in this fight. And that's what changed it overall. And then this fight here Saturday, I think a lot of that can be very true here, where you've got Fiorot, who has this top level takedown defense rate. She's going to have the physicality and strength advantage against Shevchenko, which I think that Shevchenko normally isn't in that position. When you got Grasso, where Grasso is not physically strong. She definitely looked like she was trying to bulk up in the last fight a little bit, but she's not physically strong. That's just not, she could be taken down. She could be controlled. It's a clear path. That's not a path here. That's not even, I don't even believe, a real option here for Shevchenko, unless she gets tricky with some trips. I do think that she can keep the standing. And if this fight stays standing, I think Manon, who is a high-level striker overall, she's going to be the harder hitter between these two. And I think that, again, you've seen Shevchenko slow down. I think Manon has the faster hands overall, and even the volume. Manon pushes out a nice volume, high volume, and there's times where Shevchenko can be very low volume, which I believe that's also why she started to lean on her wrestling. And I think this is just a tough stylistic matchup for Shevchenko. I do think that you're going to see a new champion here. I think that Manon is in a great position here, although, again, they're both very close. 37 years old for Shevchenko, 35 for Manon, but this is another spot where this has been a long career for Valentina, and I think that Fiorot is really hitting her stride as well. So in this spot here, I'm taking another new champion here. I'm taking Manon Fiorot to get the job done, minus 140. And the next one here we're going to talk about is going to be Jose Aldo, minus 220. In the comeback here, we got Ayman Zahabi, plus 175. Now, you got Aldo here, a sizable favorite. And, I get it. The guy, former champion, legend, all these things here that we're talking about, 32 pro victories. There's a lot of great things that he has done. He's a fan favorite. People like the guy. But this really feels to me like a spot of one fighter on the rise and one fighter on the decline. And you've got Aldo, who is now 38 years old, Ayman Zahabi, who is 37 years old. But when we're talking MMA mileage, it is, Aldo definitely is on the very high side of MMA mileage, which I do believe that's also why he retired when he retired. He just had, he had been fighting his whole life. He finally said, hey, let me take a break. And that also, I think, is an issue here, where you've got Zahabi, who is a guy that, years ago, he really wasn't that active. He was a fighter, but he just wasn't as active. Now he really, over the last couple of years, has really turned it on, has looked like he's really full force here. He's on a nice 5-0 run. And I think it's the best shape that he's been in his career. And he continues to look better. While Aldo, he retired, right? He comes back, he fights 2 fights, but 3 of his last 5 fights were boxing fights. So to me, he's 1-1 since he's come back to the UFC. But to me, he's not all in on MMA. He's not all in. There is just no way he's all in. And it's just for him being wishy-washy with this. He's Hall of Famer, great career, but he's got the name. But to me, at this spot here, this could be maybe we're going to see the worst version of Aldo and the best version of Zahabi on Saturday night. And now you start to look at this number at plus 175. It starts to seem pretty wide here in this spot. And I think, stylistically, we are seeing improvements from Zahabi. I think we're clearly seeing improvements. And one of the biggest, I think, knocked on Zahabi was his low volume. I think the guy's got some solid boxing, solid striking. He does have some power, but the volume has always been a problem. And over the last two fights, you have seen that start to increase. He's really starting to push out a higher pace. And I think that can help him in this spot, especially in his most recent fight, which I believe was Pedro Munoz. He landed 109 significant strikes, had a nice output, a solid victory. And I think that's what we're starting to see here. Plus, you start to add in the fact that, he's got solid defense. His striking defense is 71%, very high overall. He works his angles very well. And I think that's where we're going to see him find a lot of success. And not only that, but Aldo is a guy who just doesn't really use leg kicks anymore. And, we're not really seeing that. We didn't even see that before he retired. It was kind of like, where's the leg kicks from Aldo? When is he going to start shooting these, firing off these leg kicks? He just never really was doing it. And I think that also is just now we're talking about a guy who started to box now. Is he going to really be looking to fire off leg kicks more now? I don't think we've even seen that. Yeah, sure, he does them sparingly, but it's not something that he's really dedicated to that has made his hands even more lethal because he's chopping away at the legs and then he's got the fast hands. I think this is going to be a spot where you've got Zahabi at a plus 175 number. I think is a good spot on an aging out Aldo who's half in the sport, while Zahabi really feel like he's in the right spot here. So in this spot here, I am taking the Canadian in Aiemann Zahabi at plus 175. And the last one here we're going to talk about is going to be Bukauskas. He is minus 110 on the comeback here. We've got Ian Cutelaba. He is minus 110. So we got a pick and price here. And anytime we're talking about a Cutelaba fight, we're talking about a highly volatile fight. Now, this guy has a ton of power. He can be sloppy. He wants to brawl. He's going to be very explosive early as well, too. And we know we're going to be getting out of this guy. He's going to be coming forward. He's going to be throwing, and he's not going to be very economical really with his cardio. Now, there are spots where he has started to kind of be a little bit more patient, and then there's spots where he just goes out there, balls to the wall, starts throwing and having that, kill or be killed kind of mentality. But when you're looking at this now that you've got Modestas, who is now making his second stint in the UFC, and this is another spot where I do feel like we're seeing improvements from him. He's 4-1 since returning to the UFC, and he's got some stoppages. He's had some nice decision wins. But I think that we're just seeing a little bit more from him, and I also do think that we are seeing some advantages for him in this particular fight, and I think the striking advantages really do favor him, because when you really look and break down really what Cutelaba does, I mean, he's just, he's a barbarian out there. He is throwing these big overhands. He's not really setting up combinations very well. And you've got Modestas, who I think is the far more technical striker, has the better combinations, better shot selection, better footwork. And I think one of the other big things here is he's the better minute winner, I think, by far. And that is going to be an opportunity for him here where, I think the combinations will be there. I think he can land the better shots. I think that, the big moments here could come from Cutelaba. Again, he throws big time power. He throws everything in all of his shots. So if something lands, it's a fight changing moment. Obviously, that's an opportunity for Cutelaba to start to find success. But Cutelaba is kind of who he is. You know what I mean? I mean, the guy's not really adding tools to his arsenal. He's not really changing anything. And, yeah, sure, he has started to be a little more patient, but I think sometimes being patient might be better for Modestas, because I think he's just the better overall fighter. And I also don't think that, Cutelaba is a guy that is going to be able to, continually, work solidly and put 3 solid rounds together. The guy is, someone who's going to probably not have the cardio. Now, he can look to wrestle. I think that is a path for him. I think he can look for that. But overall, when you're looking at this, I just think that he doesn't have the cardio to really fuel these repetitive takedowns. I think that early can get a little dicey here for for Modestas, but he's going to have a 3-inch reach advantage, a 2-inch height advantage, and I do think overall he's going to have the cardio advantage. So I think this is a spot here where Cutelaba going to get a little dicey in that first round, but I do think as this fight goes on, the win probability for Modestas continues to get better here, and especially if he wins that first round, I think that, again, he can just either find that late finish, win on the scorecards here. So I'm taking Modestas Bukauskas at -110. So there you have it for my plays for UFC 315. If you want to become a client, link down in the description. Already have 4 plays up. A lot of units going to be riding on this weekend. Very excited about it. Love this card from a betting perspective. And let's get it done this Saturday, and let's cash.